So welcome to our Tuesday night masterclass. It's so much more. And tonight we're talking all about our liver. Like I said, we're talking about the secrets of metabolic mastery series, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease epidemic, and how to love your liver for life. Let's get started. So of course, like all of our master classes, everything that we do is always centered on the 4 pillars of optimal wellness, because this is really the map, right? This is how we go from where you are now to wherever you want to be, right? And essentially this trip that we're taking, it is a constant and evolutionary process. There is not really necessarily an optimal wellness arrival, right? Because like there's always the next level that we're reaching. So but we always go through the 4 pillars because this is, like I said, this is the map. And so we're balancing cellular fuel delivery, we're lifting metabolic and immune function, clarifying toxic buildup, and stabilizing all the endocrine function. And then of course, daily working on calming stress and restoring nutritional energy. So super, super important. Now, so far, we have been talking about the Secrets of Metabolic Mastery series, and we are on week 5. And so far, we have talked about, are you suffering from stress metabolism? That was our very first week, and how stress and metabolism integrate and work together. Well, or how stress kind of exacerbates metabolic, function. And then, of course, we talked about setting your goals straight. And then week 3, we talked about eating for energy from sunrise to sunset and keeping our blood sugar balanced. And then last week, we talked about releasing what no longer serves us. And we had our special presentation with Jennifer Pressimone, specifically on using our aromatherapy tools to help us to release not only stored weight, but also toxins, traumas, stress, emotions, and everything else that no longer serves us, so that we can just let it all go. So tonight we're going to talk about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and how it's really and truly an epidemic. It's like we're calling it the next tsunami in Western medicine. And really, the place that I want to come from on this is how to love your liver for life, because I'm going to tell you, it's a super important organ. And I think sometimes we don't give it the proper care and attention, like how important it is, as we do, like, people talk about like, heart and things like that. And all of those, like every organ in your body is important. But sometimes we forget how important your liver is. And so tonight we're going to talk about that. And specifically, I will tell you this particular subject comes directly from conversations that I've had with you guys, as well as, as my own clients and speaking with other people. And this has been a conversation that it keeps coming up over and over and over. People will come to me and say, my doctor mentioned that I have this fatty liver. What do I do about it? And what is it? And all these things. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So as we get started, what does the liver do in the first place? Right? So the liver helps with a lot of things, but it's really part of the digestive system, right? So as we have talked about previously, or if you're brand new, the digestive system is basically many organs that digest food into vitamins and minerals and nutrients. And we learned that it's bi-directional with our nervous system, right? And so our digestion begins in our head, right? And our brain kind of starts the process. And then we have the mouth, and we come on down through the esophagus, we come down to the stomach, we include the pancreas, the liver, the gallbladder, all the things that are kind of included there as accessory organs come from the stomach into the large or the small and then the large intestine. And so we include all of these organs together and we call it the digestive system. Now, when things enter through the mouth, and so generally it should be like really good, clean food, but sometimes there's unwanted pathogens or factors or things like that get in to the digestive system, maybe don't get properly digested right. And then we get things that we've talked about previously, like inflammation, leaky gut, and they cause lots of inflammation systemically in the body. And so one of the things that we can also get from this whole process of inflammation is a syndrome called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And this can cause pain. So tonight we're going to be looking at specifically what that is. So what does the liver do? The liver is located in the upper right-hand portion of the body, right here on top of the stomach, right? Like it kind of lays over the stomach. And the liver is basically about the size of a football, and it's a reddish brown wedge-shaped organ. And it has many functions, right? And every single one of its functions are 100% required to keep the body functional, right? And so some of the processes that it includes is it helps with blood volume regulation, like basically how much blood is going through your body and regulating when you need more blood and less, and then sending the messages over to the heart to do that work. That comes from the liver, right? Immune system support. It also helps control growth signaling pathways for the endocrine system, right? Some other jobs that it does is it stores glycogen and other vitamins for the body to use later, right? It also helps to make biofluid to help the body digest food. It helps to clean out toxins from the blood, and especially toxins that are connected to fats, but it really, like triglycerides, it really helps with all toxins though. It helps to metabolize proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And it produces substances to help with blood clots. So this is really, really essential function. Liver, super important. Now, what is this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, right? It's very possible with the rise of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease that just about everybody on this call has either heard about it personally or knows somebody who might have fatty liver, going on in their body, right? And until recently, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, it was actually thought of as a symptom of something else. Now, I will say I actually agree with that. But what Western medicine had done with that concept was they basically, the medical industry basically put aside non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. They made it an afterthought and nobody ever really talked about it. But recently that's kind of changed, right? And now non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is considered to be the most common liver disease in the Western world, and currently has no real approved pharmacological therapy. So one of the things that's important to understand about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or just fatty liver inflammation and congestion in general, is that the way we work with this is through lifestyle, right? And so non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is the asymptomatic accumulation of triglycerides and other fats in your hepatocytes. Well, basically we're talking about your liver cells, right? And the liver is considered fatty when the fat content exceeds 5% of the liver's volume. So we're looking at this picture right here. This is kind of like a zoomed in picture of what non-alcoholic fatty liver disease looks like. Now this picture, if we look at this just from the zoom in, it has quite a bit of fat deposits in this particular image. This would be a very advanced stage of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, because the very beginning, as I said, is when it exceeds 5% of the liver's volume. And the way they measure that, because without a biopsy, there's no real way. So the way they measure that is they look at the picture of what size the liver is and what it's supposed to be, right? So the more fat deposit that builds up in the liver starts growing, right? And so the liver gets like inflamed and swollen. right? And so they'll look at the size of it, and if it's grown by 5% of its actual volume, then they'll say that you have fatty liver disease at that point. Now, that's the very beginning. There's actually a spectrum of changes ranging from just that you barely have it, right? So right here, we have this healthy liver. And then you start to get like where you barely have it. And then you have something called inflammatory hepatitis, right? And then eventually you'll get fibrosis, where the inflammation starts causing scar tissue to accumulate. And then this final phase right here is cirrhosis of the liver. And this is where the scar tissue is causing damage to the liver itself. Now, this is really interesting because this is exactly what cirrhosis of the liver that's caused from alcoholic cirrhosis, like from somebody who has like drank a lot in their lifetime and they get cirrhosis of the liver. It actually looks the same because the scar tissue starts to break down the liver tissue itself. So like I said, there's a spectrum. Now, here's the thing to remember. Allowing this fat to accumulate in the liver is as dangerous as viral hepatitis if left unaltered, right? Because non-alcoholic fatty liver disease can lead to irreversible damage of the liver, right? And here's the thing. In Western medicine, once you get to here, generally the only thing they have to do for you is a liver transplant if you're lucky, right? And so the longer that the liver is left just to accumulate all the fat, the more chance it has to be inflammatory and the more chance it gets to develop the cirrhosis. Now, here's the thing. 5 to 8% of patients will develop liver cirrhosis within 5 years once they're diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease if left unaltered, right? So that's why this is important, because 5 years is not a long time, right? So you can basically go from here to here in 5 years if you continue down the path of, you know, poor lifestyle choices and lack of exercise and lack of supplementation and everything else that we're about to talk about. If you continue down that, 5 years is not very long that you can go on this thing. So the estimates right now, and the reason why we're talking about this tonight is it is estimated that by 2030, 25 million Americans may require liver transplant. This is literally the statistic that researchers and medical professionals are calling the coming tsunami, because we're not ready in the United States for how many people will need new livers, right? So here's the good news. We don't have to worry about any of that, right? Because we're going to talk about it right now. We're going to talk about the symptoms, and we're going to talk about what we can do to prevent all of that. Okay. So what are the symptoms? Like, how would we know if we even have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or a congested liver in general, right? So the initial symptoms are kind of generalized, right? It could be fatigue, right? Pain or discomfort in the upper right abdomen. So like where your liver is. It could be bloating or general fullness in the abdomen, right? Like they're not really like very specific. Now, if you have pain specifically like in the liver like region, it's a good time to, you know, really address it. But general bloating, fullness, fatigue, those are kind of more abstract and could be kind of related to a lot of things, right? Now, of course, there are some advanced symptoms like abdominal swelling and enlarged blood vessels, which would be just beneath the skin surface. If you have an enlarged spleen, if you look at your palms and they're really, really red a lot of times, or if you have yellowing skin and eyes, which we typically call jaundice, those are more advanced symptoms of more progression in the spectrum of damage, right? But it's okay. The liver, what's so amazing about it is the liver is one of the most forgiving organs as far as how well it heals itself and how much you can basically regenerate itself. So what do we do, right? How can we love our liver for life? Well, here's the big one. Weight loss is probably the most important, because here's the thing. What research has shown is that if you lose between 3 and 10% of your body weight, you can basically improve the inflammation of the liver almost instantaneously. So that's not a lot, right? Like 3%, 10% of your body weight. So wherever you are, you just kind of calculate that out for yourself. It's not really a whole lot, but even if you just do that little bit of weight loss, you will improve your liver inflammation and congestion by like measurable amounts. Like it's a huge, like it's one of the largest pendulum swings. Another one is exercise. Now, research has shown that you need at least 150 minutes per week of exercise. Now think about that. That is not a whole lot, right? Like that's, if you did 30 minutes of exercise 5 times a week, then you're hitting it, right? Every time. If you did 45 minutes of exercise and you did it a few less times a week, then you're still right there. Now, the thing about exercise is it's not specific. Any sort of exercise is beneficial, not only for the body in general, but also for the liver, right? And so research studies show that whether it is, something like more strenuous, like, a CrossFit or something more aggressive, or whether it's something more gentle and relaxing, like swimming or walking or yoga or whatever, that it doesn't really matter. Like you still get the same benefits. And when you exercise, you have an increase in fatty acid oxidation, you have a decrease in fatty acid synthesis. And what's interesting is the mitochondria and all the cells, and specifically the mitochondria in the liver cells, actually are like they're able to do their job at a higher level. And the damage of the liver, like that happened from scar tissue, actually is prevented and reduced, right? So the more exercise we do, the more we move, the more we sweat and move our bodies, the better it is for our liver. And not just, like I said, for the current situation and prevention, but what we see is that the damage to the liver cells from scar tissue buildup is actually reduced and reversed through exercise. So that's really, really interesting research that we see as we start to look at lifestyle and how we can help with this particular issue. Now, another thing is we want to reduce inflammation systemically, right? So like I had said, like when we eat and we put food in our body and everything else, if we're building up inflammation, whether it's pathogens, toxins, whatever, that's going to affect our liver as well, because our liver is going to be filtering through our blood. And so any kind of inflammatory processes that are going through our blood and taken out all over, right, are also affecting the liver as well. Now, so for that reason, we want to manage pathogens and toxins and all of those things as well, as we've talked about previously. Now, there's some very specific supplements that there's so much scientific evidence and research on that I really wanted to highlight those tonight, and specifically the volume of research with curcumin extracted from turmeric that helps to support the inflammatory reduction in the liver is a lot, right? There's a lot of it. And so I will tell you that my favorite way to get this particular nutrient in my body is every single day I take SolleFlex PI, right? And I know y'all have heard me say this so many times, but I take it every single day, not just for that one ingredient in there, but for its overall effects, because yes, it has this curcumin in it, but it also has the grapeseed extract and the boswellia and all of the other things as well that also help with systemic inflammation. So that's where I like to get mine. Again, omega-3 fatty acids. Now, and now we're going to talk about healthy fats also. So these are two that we can talk about together, because when we're talking about fat buildup in the body anywhere, but specifically, especially in the liver, it's just kind of like when you're washing your dishes, right? You'd have to use like fat to break down fat, right? Like, so if you have a greasy pan and you put it in the water, you like the water just kind of runs off of it. But when you use like a degreaser, which is like an oily substance, it starts to break down the fat, right? So fat breaks down fat. So that's the reason why your omega-3 fatty acids and your healthy fats are really, really, really beneficial anytime we're talking about fatty congestion buildup, whether it's in the liver or anywhere else in the body. And then what I want to throw in specifically, because very specific research, very promising, very well studied, and that's yerba mate. And the research for yerba mate is very promising about specifically reducing the effects of fatty liver damage in the liver. And so, you know, I can tell you a number of ways that I like to get my yerba mate, but I love it in Cinnamate. And also, of course, we have it now in our SolleFIT GP as well. And so those are some really great supplements as well, if you want to look at adding those. So that brings us to our soul connection. And just like last week, we had our president of Solle Naturals and founder come talk to us about SolleFIT GP. And last week we talked about the grains of paradise and also the rooibos, which is one of the adaptogens. And so tonight I've asked him to give us some more. Specifically, I asked him to share about how SolleFIT GP can fit into this kind of metabolic and liver health conversation.
Happy to do that, Erica, and thanks for all the great information. Always puts me in deep thought. And I have to give a little shout out too, because you mentioned some really good supplements. And I love the fact that you said that, you know, you prefer to get a little bit in you every day of some of those liver protecting and liver enhancing and liver healing supplements. I am a 100% behind that myself. I would much rather do a little bit every single day than to have to really, really ramp up, even though you can do that as well. If you find yourself in a really tough situation, there is hope. And it's so interesting. I got back from Mexico over the weekend. We were in a couple of cities down there. And always, whenever I'm talking about the different soul formulas, even though I'm not a mentor, I'm not someone that sits with people, I'm just usually sharing why we have what is in our formulas and why they're put together the way they are, what our philosophy is. So I'll always have a few people come up after and go, my mother has this situation, what do you recommend? But when you look at liver, and someone came up with a 22-year-old son with fairly advanced fatty liver. So it's true what you say. And this is in Mexico. It's not just here in the United States. I agree with you. I think it's getting and going to get even more and more prevalent. But it's something that can be really, really well dealt with if we'll just sort of commit to it and kind of rewatch and think about this presentation you've given us today. So a quick shout out to some very special liver strengthening formulas at Solle. You mentioned omegas, Solle Megas, putting the right fats. It just turns out that one of the great answers is one of the simplest. Put really good fats. In other words, more fats to get rid of fatty liver, more fats. The opposite of what your intuition might be, but they're the good fats. But yeah, Solle Megas, that we even have a food. It's a very dense therapeutic food, Infatuate. It's all about the good fats that you listed. I'll mention one that maybe isn't on the top of people's list, but it can go onto Erica's list, Longevity. It actually has some very special liver. And I cannot also leave behind the deep clarifying, the deep, very thorough, the Sanskrit name. It's the only product of Solle that has a Sanskrit word in it, Amitox. Amit is a Sanskrit word. And that one has 2 or 3 really amazing liver changers. So shout out to those. But back to GP. I want to tell you there are at least 4 herbs in SolleFIT GP that are directly for your liver. And I would say a top 2 reason, or a bare minimum top 3 reason for their inclusion in the formula was the liver. So they're like 4. And then there's a couple more that are indirect, but they're just as, just as vital, just as crucial to the formula. And like you said last week, Erica, we talked a little bit about the grains of paradise. So this is just a quick little reminder. Remember, there were 2 different studies in the brief. I mean, it's so understudied. It's not underused. There's not any lack of history really changing people's health, but there is a lack of some of the study that we're used to here in the West. And so you've just got a couple of things showing really strong protective activity for your liver by grains of paradise. So a little review, we mentioned them last week, but there were 2, and the evidence of that is the sharp increase in one of the body's most important antioxidants, glutathione, going up with grains of paradise in a situation where a liver is exposed to radiation. And I like to bring that up because there are a lot of ways we're exposed to various types of radio waves. And we very confidently talk about why we need all this technology, and it's amazing. But nobody can tell you long-term what it does because it hasn't been around long enough. But it is not, to me, coincidental that some of these situations that Eric has talked about are building over time and parallel some of that. And so I'm not saying that it's the whole reason, but what I am saying is that there is a correlation there, in my opinion. So even the grains of paradise, that first ingredient we talked about last week, is absolutely a big deal for your liver. And if you have some liver issues, yes, it can actually pretty quickly send your body into a cleanse mode or a fix mode that can be, it can take you through some stages there. But it is to a good end. The next ingredient is apple cider vinegar. And apple cider vinegar does lots of good things all throughout the gut, lots of good things for our immunity, lots of good things to do with blood sugar. And as Erica talked about, the liver is involved in that too, in terms of storage. And so anything and everything that we can do that makes us more efficient there, not only is it going to help the pancreas, but it actually is going to directly help the liver. What apple cider vinegar, some studies show, and this is what Dr. Allison shared with us, and just improve our sensitivity, the cell's sensitivity to the insulin, which helps have that process happen the way it should happen and balance it. So apple cider vinegar is a big one, just briefly. I happen to believe that ashwagandha, another key ingredient in SolleFIT GP, I guess it's one, it probably, if you look enough, it probably has some liver studies that show direct benefit. But I like to think of it in our formulation, it was indirect, because I am fascinated by any study, including the Chinese philosophy, that looks at how emotions line up with various health processes, and specifically to some of the organs. And liver is one where clearly, if we can have a better response to stresses, particularly with anger, we see whatever those roles are to do with those emotional chemicals. Maybe Erica could tell us about them. This is not something I'm an expert in, except to the degree to know that when we put our stress management in a better situation, which we can do with nutrition, we can help ourselves, I'll say it that way, greatly with nutrition and make it possible, then we actually do see a change in strength and in the liver's ability to detoxify, keep itself functioning the way it could. So ashwagandha, to me, perhaps a direct, but I look at it indirectly. Now, the next one is a member of the mint family. Coleus forscola is another ingredient in SolleFIT GP. And yes, it's a member of the mint family, but also its studies are directly related to how our body metabolizes fats, and particularly some of the enzymes that are involved there. And what science knows now is that this therapeutic mint relative actually does modulate those enzymes and their expression in improving our fat metabolism. So you can find a lot of different extracts of this coleus at different levels of these components that affect the enzymes. And so we actually do have a standardized extract of that one to those 2 studied levels in the SolleFIT GP, directly helping the liver. Nopal cactus, I would call that one indirect, but maybe it's such an amazing adaptogen. It probably has some direct studies. It excels in the way our body handles blood sugar and levels of sugars and how and sugar storage. But there are plenty of studies that I think were focused on the heart that end up relating to fats in the blood, and also other issues that directly tie to the liver and metabolic syndrome. So Nopal, even though we talk about it for something else, it's a strong component for liver health, again, in this formula. There is a probiotic in SolleFIT GP, just reminding us all, there is the German named probiotic, which is heat resistant, does not need to be refrigerated. It's the PF, the Freudenreichii. And one of the things that probiotic strain is known to do is to manufacture, to use that term, short chain fatty acids, CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, and these wonderful nutrients that are important in the process we're talking about today. So I wanted to mention all those. Now, the last 2 were part of Dr. Allison's presentation, that are the final 2 ingredients in SolleFIT GP, are a little more direct, and they're red beets, specifically red beetroot, right? And rooibos, a red South African bush. Both of these 2, it is interesting to me in this lift product, and actually there's actually 3 more ingredients, but Erica mentioned yerba mate already. Yerba mate is a big part of this formula. She covered that already. But it is interesting that you have these reds in our SolleFIT GP that are direct liver strengtheners in a very, very strong way. There's all sorts of evidence that show that bile flow, bile that our liver produces, that's so important and obviously essential to the metabolism of fats, but also to detoxification. Those 2 keys, big, huge, giant keys to metabolic mastery. Beets are superstars in helping. If we find a way to bring beets into our diet, we can really change that. We can change any liver condition, I believe anyway, from where it is to a better condition. And so the red beets, we actually have them in 2 forms, because one of them is sort of the whole beet, because we want all of that glutathione production. 2 of our body's very most famous anyway detoxifiers, glutathione and then SOD, superoxide dismutase, are both produced by beetroot. And then bile itself, we talk a lot about maintaining a clean and a beautiful red liver, and not a fatty liver, because we can detox. And when I read that and when I think about that, I think of emotions. So I think of both of those things, detoxing, because it is all biochemical at this point, and what the liver is dealing with. And so beets are kind of like that beautiful double whammy, double benefit. They are shown to actually increase bile. I mentioned bile flow, but also blockages between the liver. And that's another interesting study. In fact, that study, I believe rooibos showed as well, so that the bile can flow to the gallbladder. where it concentrates to greater levels and just basically is more effective for us, more efficient, more leveraged. But also our lymph. Red beets also move lymph, which is essential to maintaining clarity. All our yellow products at Solle are all about removing blockages. If we can do that, then everything can function better. So red beets, even though this is a red label product, there's a lot of yellow function in red beets. And I need to add finally that the reason we have two different forms of the beets in here is because you have all this liver health and you also have the concentrate of beet nutrients that improve oxygen flow, clearer thinking, stronger cells, and greater energy levels in cells. So everything they need to perform, they need energy to perform. Beets are right there on the front line with that. And they do other things too. They're super rich in B vitamins and in calcium and in iron and lots of great things. So the last one that I've kind of already mentioned is rooibos. Rooibos is a fermented, so this particular material is fermented from the bush. And actually, years ago, Dr. Allison pointed out this was looked down upon, and now the absolute opposite by science. They're seeing that many of these fermented naturals actually do better. And rooibos is one of them, or meaning the body actually is able to leverage them even better. One of the things that rooibos is so good at is ramping up this wonderful glutathione that our liver produces. And in fact, one of the studies she talked about was doubling it. It was a certain amount and it was large amounts. Now we have a concentrated rooibos. I don't think our concentrated amount would be equal to that study amount, but it's a very good amount. And we're about the philosophy of do this every day. Instead of just one time, do a bunch and I'm going to double this for my liver. I'm just going to double my liver's position. Just strengthen it every day by a good chunk. The final thing that rooibos was so, one of the studies that I think this is another one Dr. Allison shared was cortisol. And Eric has talked about this in the past. It flat out lowers. We have way too much in general, way too much in the system. With rooibos, body won't produce as much. And so lots of great benefits for these that are complementary, but a lot of them are pretty directly to the liver. So GP is it's a direct player in liver nutrition.
I love that. It's funny because, the formula hasn't been out that long, guys. And every time I look at it, I'm like, wow, this has so much good stuff in it. It's really good. I think it's it's definitely a great product to move energy through the liver, I will tell you. So I love GP for that as well. Helps to move a lot of that stuff out of the way, but there is an end to that, right? And so if you have a congested liver as well, you might experience some physical things, right? I know one of the big things that I hear all the time from people when they first start is a couple of things. There's makes them go to the bathroom a lot more, right? Well, you got to get all of that stuff out, right? We got to flush out, especially liver toxins are often going to look like, more bowel movements, right? Because we got to push those things out of the body. And so those are some things that that I've heard a lot about GP. But what I know is the formula just blows me away. And the results people get. Oh, and speaking of, it's interesting. Okay, so my favorite way to get beets is in SolleFIT GP, because if you know me, you know that beets are not my favorite food in the world, right? And so I will tell you, the smell of beets in GP was actually I opened it up the first time and I was like, it smells like beets. I was totally expecting it to smell like vinegar for some reason because it had apple cider vinegar. And so it totally threw me off, and it had the strongest beet smell. And so of course, because I have to try everything open it up and I have to taste it. And I was expecting it to taste like beets. Well, guess what, guys? It doesn't really taste like beets at all. You can't taste any beets. And so of course I know that she puts her capsules in her cinnamate and she absolutely loves it. It adds this kind of ginger flavor to it. It's also the way that my son does his. And it just gives this ginger, cinnamon thing. And especially right now as the weather's starting to get colder, all those warming nutrition herbs in there. Just, I don't know, just makes like the perfect morning beverage. And I'll tell you, if you need an energy boost, that thing works, right? A little bit right before your workout, you got your pre-workout going on. So if I drink rooibos tea and take GP, will that be too much? No, because essentially, although I don't think everybody recognizes rooibos as an adaptogen, essentially it's an adaptogen, right? Like it has all the properties of an adaptogen. So you're not going to really get too much. I mean, the only thing you might get is you might go to like, you know, you might have to urinate more often, but you'll be fine. You'll be fine. All those things are good. Yes, if you haven't started or tried GP or added it to your program, it's a really, really great product to add to your program. It's one of those that you'll know is working.
Can treated hepatitis B cause fatty liver?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that, but I'm not going to like, it's not a cause, right? Like, so if you have hepatitis, if you have had hepatitis B in the past, right, that just means you had inflammation in your liver. And it's very possible that you had some scar tissue damage from that infection, right? And then, so then they treated the infection and then that went away, but the damage, it doesn't necessarily go away, right? Like, cause that's not the way Western medicine works. They don't really care about the damage to your body. I mean, they give us prescriptions that damage our body. So they don't really care about that. They figure that later after you get rid of the disease, then you can go and worry about the damage, right? I always compare it to like, if your house is on fire, when the fire department comes in and they take their axe and they bang, you know, like they bust every single one of your windows and they bang the axe on the door and they put holes in everything and they spray everything with water and they've totally ruined your house, right? But they put out the fire and they're like, woo, good job, guys, we put out the fire. That's the way Western medicine works, right? Because if the carpenter comes up and he says, y'all destroyed the house, right? That's essentially what it is, right? And so then you have to repair the damage afterwards. So it doesn't necessarily cause the fatty liver. Fatty liver disease is actually caused, or not even if it's not a disease, but it's just the regular fatty liver congestion. It's actually caused by our lifestyle choices, right? Not moving enough, eating too much sugar, right? And basically just not eating the right amounts of like vegetables and things like that, right? But specifically also not moving enough and then not managing stress levels. That's actually what is actually causing it. But if you have scar tissue buildup in the liver already, right, from a previous incident, then you kind of have like, you already have a couple of steps forward as far as the scar tissue buildup. But either way, the most beautiful thing about the liver is how incredibly regenerative it is. And I've always figured that our creator knew that we were going to live a very crazy life, right? Like when he created us and put us here, he was like, these people they're going to do it. So we're going to give them this organ that is completely foundational in their existence. And we're going to give them about 10 times more of it than they actually need. And we're going to make it regenerate itself so that it will heal itself along the way, because they're going to keep messing this up along the way. And so that's the beautiful thing about the liver, is it will continuously regenerate. All we got to do is love it and take care of it. And I will tell you, one of the things we didn't mention today, but I'm going to plug it right now, is NeuroIM. Because when you look at all of those mushrooms, you're going to see a ton of studies about the liver as well. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that one in. Y'all are probably sitting here thinking like they just mentioned the whole Solle catalog. We might have. It's kind of one of those things. Solle products really help the liver. I mean, there's plenty of them we didn't mention that we could. But I always say that, y'all know, you've heard me say that before, that there's pretty much any product in the catalog. I can show you how it helps just about everything that's out there. And so other than that, guys, thank you so much. I see lots of thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate you and your time, Greg, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.